So we're talking about faith today. That's a tough one, because I think we'd like to say that we have faith, and sometimes things happen and people say, God, how could this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? And sometimes it's hard to pull that faith up, because sometimes we get in our own way and can't find that faith. I want to tell you about Joanne today. When I met Joanne and her husband Jim, they were close to mid-60s. They had met early on when Joanne was an ER nurse, and Jim was doing his residency for orthopedic surgery. And they met in the OR. And they started dating, and they decided that they would fall in love. And they did, and then decided that they would wait a couple of years to have kids. So on the occasion that I was called to their home, it was because Jim, who was, and also was Joanne, but Jim was an avid outdoorsman. Jim liked to hike, he liked to spelunk, he liked to kayak, he liked to snow ski, he liked to water ski. If it was anything to do outside, he would do that. And so he had started taking a group of people, we lived in Arizona, and he had started taking a group of people from ASU, Arizona State University, once a year on a kayaking trip. And he had kind of set up a scholarship thing, and because he was an orthopedic surgeon, it was usually people that were going through the sports medicine classes at ASU that he would get to go. So this particular time, he had 4 guys with him. And Jim was real excited because he had sold his practice 18 months earlier, and he had said, I will stay for 18 months so I can help transition the practice well. And he only had 6 months left. And he was real excited that he was going to be able to have time with he and Joanne while they both were still happy and healthy to go do things. So Jim had taken this group of men, children, 18, 19, 20-ish, out into the wilderness of Arizona to go kayaking down these waters. And Jim had gotten this new kayak. It was the top of the line. It had just come out, and it had been added an extra 6 inches. And Jim was tall, and he had really long legs. And he thought 6 inches worth of space in the front of me is going to be wonderful. I think some people can probably understand that. And so they put in the kayaks, and it was going to be 4 days, 3 nights out, and they knew that part of it was in the outback, and they weren't going to be able to have any cell reception when they got out there, and that kind of made it all the more exciting. And all of their supplies were in the kayaks with them, so it was that we've got everything we're going to have, and if we flip over and lose stuff, then we're going to just have to go hunt rabbits or something, just do whatever we can do. So on the day that I got the phone call to go over to Joanne's, it was the 4th day. And they had not come back, and she had not heard from him. And she expected that she would have heard from him at the end of the 3rd day. She knew pretty much that all through the 2nd day and the morning of the 3rd day she wouldn't hear from him, because she knew they were going to be too far back. But she said, will you come sit with me while I wait? I said, absolutely. So we're sitting there, and it comes to noon, and we sit there and we talk some more. And while we're talking, she said, I don't know if I ever shared this with you. And I said, what? And she said, well, Jim and I met in the ER, and we got married, and we found out after we decided to wait 2 years before we had kids, and then we tried for 2 years longer, and we found out that together we just couldn't have any children biologically. So we decided to adopt. And she said, and that took us another 18 months or so, and then we adopted Sammy. She goes, Sammy just made our lives. He was amazing. We were so excited. You know, we had gone to school, we'd gotten the degrees, we bought the house, we'd gotten married, we'd done everything the way you're supposed to do it and everything, and now we had Sammy. And she said, and so the house we bought was in this neighborhood that had all of these children in it, and it was just so great to bring this child up in this neighborhood because other moms were having children, and I took time off, and we would take them outside and play with them and everything. And so this one evening, Sammy had been outside all day, and he'd gotten all hot and sweaty, and 2-year-old little boys are kind of about 7 o'clock at night. And so I put him in the bathtub to rinse him off and to get him nice and washed. And he came out, and he goes, I've got to tell you, I just love that smell of a nice, clean child. You can just go right into their neck right here and take that big whiff, and it just smells so good. And she said, so I dried his hair, and I put his PJs on, and while we were doing that, we heard the doorbell ring. And so I got Sammy all ready, and I could hear our neighbor's voice, and he was in there talking to Jim, and he had borrowed something, and he was bringing it back. And she said, so Sammy got ready, and he went running out of the hallway from where the bathroom was, and he ran down right at the time, the exact second that the neighbor that came had borrowed a handgun to go shooting, and he placed it down on the table right at the time Sammy ran. He saw it on the table, he ran, and he grabbed it. The handgun was too little for his hands. It fell down, and it discharged, and even with his dad, a doctor, and me, an ER nurse, we could not save our son. She said, so the reason Jim takes these trips is this would have been Sammy's birthday, and every year, in honor of Sammy, he takes guys that it started, they would have been about Sammy's age, but now Sammy would have been older than them, but he takes them on this trip. And she goes, so it's concerning to me that I haven't heard from him. And she goes, let me try him one more time. So she tries the cell, and of course, trees don't have plug-ins for your cell phone, so that wasn't helpful. And so she knew that his phone was dead. And so she looked at me and she said, whatever happens, I've gone through this before. And the first time, I wasn't sure I had enough faith to get through it. But this time, whatever God gives me, I can do it. And it wasn't long after that the state police rang the doorbell. And that they told him that indeed Jim was dead. That the snow melt had been really strong that time of the year. And that there had been a lot of rain to make the snow melt. And that the rivers were up higher than they usually were. And that as the kayak came over this waterfall that they usually make without any problem at all, Jim's with that extra 6 inches went down just perfectly and got lodged between some rocks, which made it turn around this way. And it was over an hour and a half before the 4 boys with him could get the kayak out. And so he ended up drowning in the kayak as the falls just kept beating it and beating it and beating it. And by that time it was dark, and the boys couldn't do anything but wait till daylight to then take his kayak and to kayak him back down to where they could get out and walk out. And so that's what the delay was. And she looked at me and she said, let's pray. And we did. Now, what she taught me that day was how strong faith can be. And I'm sure all of you have met people, and I know some of you are the people that have experienced tremendous grief. But it only takes a little bitty size, like the mustard seed, for that faith to grow. But what has to happen is we have to get over the idea that our faith is there to keep us from being hurt. Because a lot of people think that that's what faith is. If I just have enough faith, I won't get hurt in life. How many people here know about zorbing? Zorbing is this great big ball. It's kind of like a human hamster ball. And it's huge, and you climb up into it. It has a hole, a hole big enough for a person to climb up inside of it, and it's filled with air. And the part you go into is open, and then it has this huge air pocket around it, and then it has another one like this. And you can, if you're in a real big meadow area, you can roll like a hamster does, roll the ball all around. Or in Phoenix, they had this shop, this place, that you could have up to 4 zorbing balls going on at one time. And you would climb in, and you can, kind of like bumper cars, you can hit each other as you zorb around. Now, sometimes if you're outside, they make it more fun by filling the zorb thing up with water up to here. So every time you roll over, you get hit with water. That doesn't sound like fun to me. But the thing with the zorbing balls is some people envision faith like that if they have enough faith, when they do run into obstacles, it's not going to hurt. They're just going to hit that thing, and they're going to bounce off of it. And that's not what Jesus tells us. Jesus does not tell us that we have zorbing ball faith, that if we have it, things aren't going to hurt. That's not it at all. What Jesus tells us is that if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, that it's internal and that it runs deep inside of us. And that when things happen, like a horrible accident with a toddler and a gun, that in the depth of that hell, Jesus is sitting right there with you and will never leave you. And then years later, in the depth of hell, when the state trooper is standing at the front door telling you that your husband that you were ready to retire with in just months has been killed in a freak kayak accident doing the thing he loved. Sometimes you wondered almost more than you. Kayak faith would say it wouldn't hurt, but trust me, it hurts. But mustard seed faith that grows deep and has roots gets you through it. So Jesus is telling us that it's not the size of the faith, it's the deepness of the faith that gets us through whatever it is that we need to get through. It's little bitty, teeny tiny. It doesn't have to be big like the coconut. It has to be, in the immortal words of Luther, a bouncy ball for an ant size. So if you would like to have a mustard seed before you leave worship today, I would love to give you one. Put it someplace, and when you think things are getting tough, look at it and say, this faith, this size is all I need to grow deep inside of me. And together with God, whatever, ever it is I face, I can get through it. And all God's people say, amen.